I call the member for Wright.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise to speak on the Insurance Contracts Amendments Bill 2011. And the bill seeks to change the insurance laws to introduce a couple of points, those predominantly being a standard definition of flood insurance to contracts and introduce key fact sheets that are required or to be proved to provide for home and building contents insurance policies. The Coalition will support this bill, however we have a number of concerns about the final implementation of its measure as it's introduced. Following the major incidences of floods in 2010 and 2011 parts of Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria and Western Australia, the issue of inadequate flood insurance cover and confusion as to what was covered in the insurance policy has become predominant. Where there were serious damages to households with no or inadequate insurance coverage, wide variations in the definition of flood between insurance policies and the lack of understanding of what was covered by a policy contributed to these gaps in the insurance coverage. By that, Mr Speaker, one of the concerns I had in my electorate, being from the right, which was enormously devastated by the recent floods 12 months ago, was when a policyholder come home after being evacuated from their village or their town to be standing in their dining room with evidence of up to 4 foot of water through their living room. That's if their house was still there. And in some situations, their houses were still inundated with water. There was a degree of comfort that came over those people who had been paying insurance premiums for 20 and 30 years with good intent that they believed their house was insured. Can you imagine their despair? Can you imagine after losing their worldly possessions and in many cases losing loved ones? Could you imagine their despair when hydrology reports that were returned to the area indicated that their policy was not covered, as the determination of the flood was that of riverina flooding? This bill speaks to address and recalibrate the definition of flooding to a standard definition through all the insurance policies. To give an idea of the nation an idea of the degree of flooding that went through and the devastation that was incurred by the people of Wright, particularly, I draw on the example of the Steinhard family, who, when she recalled and relived the story of devastation that she underwent, Sue said to me, I was out and they've got a low-set house. It's about 2 or 3 foot off the ground, like typical housing commission, goes down the back steps onto a concrete pad, which is their laundry. She was out the back in the laundry and she felt 2 or 3 inches of water under her feet, up to her ankle, and she thought that because it wasn't raining, she thought that the washing machine had overflowed. So she opened the back door to try and let the water out, and the wheelie bins at the back of the door were starting to float away. So she grabbed a couple of pumpkins and to try and put up on top of the wheelie bin to stop them from floating around. And there were 3 pumpkins. By the time she picked the last one up, the wheelie bins were gone. By this stage, the water is up to her knees. She's gone up the 2 steps in fright to find the kids while they're trying to assess how quick this water is coming. She's got the kids out. They're playing in the bedroom. She's got the kids out the window up onto the carport skillion onto the side of the house, and her husband, by this stage, the water's up to their hip. And her husband is in the other bedroom trying to smash the window open, panicking, got that out and got the last kid up onto the skillion. By the time the family has evacuated onto the skillion, the water is now lapping the skillion roof, and they are scrambling to get up onto the roof, the apex of the house. They're up on top of that, the apex of the house, and I said to her, how long did all that take to evolve? And she said, as long as it took me to tell you the story. That's how quick the water came. Now, my heart goes out to those families in Queensland that were downstream of us, in Victoria that are experiencing flooding at the moment. Victoria, I understand the mass devastation that happened as a result of flooding. But in our situation in Wright, we had very little notice, and subsequently we suffered an enormous loss of life. So the message I have in speaking to this bill and supporting the bill is that if there's a bipartisan message, and leave all the politics out of it, that we can share with Australians, and Australians that may not be affected by floods, that haven't this round been affected by floods, pick up the phone, spend 40 cents, invest that time with your insurance company and check, get peace of mind with your company, because this bill will cover definitions for flooding for those new bills, for new policies being opened up. I really want to encourage Australians that have insurance to satisfy in their mind, don't leave it until the disaster season, pick up the phone, ring their insurance companies and try and get some idea as to whether or not they're insured and what the definition of flood means to them. I'll reiterate on that point again. But the Natural Disaster Insurance Review was commissioned in response to this problem on the 4th of March 2011. Consultation commenced on the 5th of April 2011 and review recommendations were received by the government on the 30th of September 2011 but not released until November. The report contained 47 recommendations providing independent reviews of issues relating to the insurance in light of the natural disasters. Despite having 6 weeks to consider the recommendations, the government deferred decisions on 39 of the 47 recommendations. In fact, the biggest decision it made was it was committed to further reviews. It seems to be a common motif of government. And why govern when you can have a review or an inquiry or a reference group or some official sounding form of procrastination? It's all or nothing with this government, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's either endless procrastination or knee-jerk reactions. It's either weak-kneed decisions or frantic overreaction. Mining tax, snap decisions, live export, snap decision, asylum seeker, another month indication, followed by a knee-jerk reaction, decision after decision. Climate change, yes we are, no we're not. Wait for a while, no definitely not under a government I lead, and then finally yes we are again. But returning to the legislation, Mr Speaker, this bill makes 2 changes to the insurance contract laws following the review. It provides for a standard definition of flood insurance contracts and requires that customers are provided with a key fact sheet outlining key information about their home and building contents insurance policies. However, this is enabling legislation only. Both the standard definition of flood and the specific contents of the key fact sheet will be made in regulations, changes to the insurance contract regulations of 1985. The industry supports both of these changes, though they have some concerns about the final version of the regulations. As with the Coalition, often we see bills come through the House where the intent of a bill may be there, but the devil is in the detail. With this particular bill, we share the industry's concerns that we don't have the regulations tabled as yet. However, in general, the changes seem to be acceptable given the level of confusion and uncertainty that surround the issue of insurance coverage in the wake of the 2010-11 floods, and the industry supports the purpose of the bill. The Coalition will be watching the final regulations closely to ensure they provide adequate certainty to all parties to ensure the contracts. Industry supports both these changes, though they have some concerns about the final version of the regulations. However, in general, the changes are seen to be acceptable given the levels of confusion and the uncertainty that surrounds the issue of insurance coverage in the wake of the 2010-11 floods. The Coalition will be watching the final regulations closely to ensure that they provide adequate certainty to all parties to ensure contracts. Certainly, the key word here, what annoys the living daylights out of the people is not knowing whether or not where they stand, particularly if they've just gone through the worst experience possible, as you can imagine, which I outlined in my opening comments. The standard definition of flood will mean that every time that the word flood appears in an insurance contract, it will be taken to mean a definition as outlined in the current regulation across all insurance companies. The legislation also restricts contracts including compound phrases, including the word flood, such as flash flood or incidental flooding. The legislation does not require that all insurance policies insure against flood. The Coalition has consistently supported efforts to develop a single standard definition for flood across the entire country and across every insurance company. after the floods in New South Wales in the mid-2007 and in Queensland in 2008, the common definition of flood was put forward as an important change by the industry at that time. The federal Labor government did nothing to progress a common definition of floods after the ACCC scuttled those previous attempts to ensure such a definition was knocked back in 2008. It took the disastrous floods of 2011 for Labor to finally consider this matter again. The Coalition supports the recommendations 36 of the Natural Disaster Insurance Reviews that the government introduced standard definitions of flood, so to avoid any consumer confusion surrounding the flood coverage with insurance policies. I'd also take this opportunity to note the government's contribution, or the joint government and in the Social Policy and Legal Affairs Review, which was undertaken by the member for Blair, the member for Moreton and the member for Murray, who also played a vital role in travelling through the country and receiving evidence. With reference to the inquiry, I note their contribution to assisting communities at large with reference to understanding the insurance ramifications. The final report recommendations the definition of flood as purpose within the Reforming Flood Insurance, Clearing the Waters consultation paper. Flood means the covering of a normally dry land by water that has escaped or been released by normal confines of A, any lake or river, creek or natural watercourse, whether or not altered or modified, and or B, any reserve or canal or dam. So that's basically an extension of riverina flooding, where it comes up out of a creek bed, which would normally make your flood insurance non-valid. The example I gave you about the Steinhards, their house backed onto a creek, and so even though there was a 23-foot wall of water that come across the flat, the insurance company took the position that because the water went down into the creek, or come down through the creek bed first, and come up out of the creek milliseconds before a 23-foot wall of water followed it, that it was deemed to be riverina flooding. It should be noted that within the present disaster season, well underway, the benefits of any standard definition will be deferred until the legislation passes. The bill requires that a key fact sheet be provided outlining important information in relation to home building and home contracts insurance policies. The key fact sheet is meant to provide consumers with key information to allow them to more easily understand and compare insurance policies. And we all know how flippant we could be with insurance policies, 2 to 3 pages of fine print. We just sign on the bottom line and forward, John. The intent of the key fact sheet is to outline some of the basic principles of coverage that your policy should cover. The draft requirement of the key fact sheet has not yet been released. In its second reading speech, Minister Shorten stated they would release the details in 2012 and would be consumer tested before being introduced. Industry does not object to the key fact sheet, but there are some concerns about its final form. Mr Deputy Speaker, while the industry does broadly support the changes in this legislation, there are some concerns that still remain. Specifically, my colleagues and I in the House of Economics take issue with the element of the final report on the bill. Specifically, we're unable to agree to paragraphs 2.5 and 2.51 on the report that outlined assurances the Department of Treasury was engaged in consultative dialogue with the industry and consumer groups, as well as the observation that there was no points raised in the submission or at the hearing of Treasury was not already across or was not taking steps to consider solutions. The clear evidence of the industry representatives at the hearing was industry's frustration that many of the issues, as identified in the report, had been raised with government over the operations of the Insurance Contract Amendments Bill remained still unresolved, with industry awaiting comprehensive consultation on regulations before obtaining any clarity on the identified issues. We know that, disappointingly, the bill has missed much of the detail created by the industry to bring certainty. Mr Speaker, just in closing, I'd like to offer my sincere, heartfelt concern for those people that are currently, their homes are inundated in parts of Australia. Whilst I pray that there should be no loss of life, because the form of the flooding was that was not similar to ours with flash flooding. Our hearts go out to everyone concerned, and may God bless them in their recovery.